Hey guys, today is the day. Today we are finally discussing the family storyline from Hello Neighbor. If you didn't see the other storyline video yet, you should watch it after this one. But just after. This is a more fleshed out plot in the game, and everything I will say can be found in the different builds. Just like in the Faust video, I will say this video is barely the surface of what is actually happening in the story. There is much more left out due to time. So let's dive in. This storyline lasted from Alpha 2 to Beta 3, so it is now a scrapped storyline. This story ends in the Beta 3 build, and the final release of Hello Neighbor has a separate story which I mentioned in this other video. I will refer to this currently discussed storyline as the family storyline simply because of the base plot. It's that the player is the neighbor's son. This was originally the plot twist in the game. Player is returning to Ravenbrooks after he's got evicted. He is reliving his traumatic childhood memories. I will talk about this later. You may say that, oh, this happens to Nikki as well in the final release of Hello Neighbor. It's the very same thing. No, it's not. It's the already mentioned result of repurposing. This player and neighbor have nothing to do with the Faust storyline characters and have nothing to do with the final storylines characters who are known as Nikki and Theodore. They look the same, but their story and roles in the story are different. But how do we tell who is who? Well, you just do research on your own. And as soon as you know enough about each plot from the past, you will slowly start appreciating the old ones. Like, oh, this thing made much more sense in this storyline level of preferring. Just some examples. The fear minigames, the giant neighbor fight, the Think fight, where the kid neighbor was later replaced by Kid Nikki. The gameplay itself is preferred over the story, obviously, but this endless repurposing at some point was the reason behind the confusion of many people. People to this day don't exactly know what storyline ends when and why are they very important. And this results a lot of disagreement between fans and even harassment. One thing is for sure, Hello Neighbor is Hello Neighbor because of the journey itself and not just the final result. The story starts in the present. Player moves back to his childhood house after he's got evicted from his apartment in the city. Based on the original concept arts, Player was a very depressed man with addictions like smoking, drinking, and God knows what else. He was very traumatized and he had non-stop nightmares. And in a scrapped intro that is in the files of the Beta 3 modkit, aka the project file of Hello Neighbor, he wanted to jump out on the window as well due to these traumatic memories. In short, he was a very ruined man, probably in his 30s. After entering the house and opening the basement door, we are back in the past during player's childhood via his memories. Neighbor fights a child. It's little and screams like a child, so yes, it's a child. That child is player himself. It's player's memory. He is present as adult in this memory, viewing the scene from the outside, trying to save his child self, which nobody did back then. So he's like, fine, I will do it myself. There was no other kid in the picture. Player is the only son of the neighbor. So neighbor fights the child and eventually he closes him to the basement, possibly due to bad behavior. The kid is hissing and is very angry in Alpha 2 and he goes upstairs where his room was. After said fight in the betas, he ends up screaming and he is close to the basement after a fight. So they definitely had a quarrel. Player, as an adult outside viewer, immediately wants to open the door to save the child. Player, as adult, isn't actually present in the past. It's all symbolical. It's a modified past memory so he can be there and eventually figure things out. And during each build, the very same story is shown over and over, with the cutscenes sometimes being different, but in the end of the day is the very same story retold. Player is back to his childhood, now as an adult, via his twisted memories, where the neighbor was still living in the very same house with him, and where the neighbor couldn't handle a child's rebellious behavior and decided to eventually lock him up. We don't know how Kid Player behaved as a child in general, like he was a generally bad kid or not. But there's one more detail which makes him angry and hopeless all the time. It's because he lost his mother. And neighbor is broken and very angry and impatient because, he lost his wife, his love, his other half. Both of them suffered from the same loss. But instead of staying separated with their inner fights, player as an adult decides to find out why did the neighbor behave towards him the way he did. And this plot element is the key. Back then, he thought it was his fault only. Maybe he was a bad child. Maybe that's why his dad was so strict. But the further player as an adult digs in his own and in fact the neighbor's memories, the more he realizes what is behind all of this really. The main element of this storyline is to show how generational trauma can mess up entire families, how it's passed down from father to son. I will say here the thing is symbolizing fear in this storyline as well, but here the thing has another form, and it's the form of a threatening, probably father. That's the moment the real problems begin to show under the surface. Player progresses in the house, which, by the way, once again this big due to his twisted memories, just like in the final game. The real size of the house is shown when the player in the present arrives. The house being so big in this memory is also possible because of the neighbor himself. Now, what do I mean by that? Each part of the house is a symbol and it can be connected to something they went through together. There's an actual metro connecting these series of memories. It's not just the house of memories, it's the way to the subconscious. And what do you know? If you look at the stations, there's a text saying the exact thing. I mean, in Veyron Clubian, but the translation is this. But the actual subconscious itself, that's the basement area. Also later about this, first let's finish the story. So the story ends with player progressing in his childhood memories. Not only progressing, he in fact figures out that the neighbor's behavior originates from the man's very own childhood, a horrible childhood ruined by his own father. So to put it very simply, the very same happened with kid neighbor like it does happen with the kid player later. The neighbor wants to keep the player away from these sensitive memories, but player is stubborn. To save his own soul, he has to save the neighbor's soul. After he progresses in the basement, he beats the giant neighbor, who is the representation of player's very own fears, and who, by the way, doesn't directly attack him. After defeating the giant neighbor, the player progresses to the back house. Now, this was also recently confirmed that the back house is always symbolizing the burden the character is carrying. Upon entering, the player finds himself face to face with the actual real enemy, the thing which is behind everything bad, fear itself. Kid neighbor is in front of him in all of his purity as a child playing with his little toys. Again, the model wasn't ready by that time and actually was never done, so it's kid neighbor, and this kid neighbor accidentally breaks something and the thing appears to punish him, just like before in the gramophone cutscene. But now that's when the player steps in. Player has to save the kid neighbor from fear itself. By now, he defeated his own fear by defeating the giant neighbor, and now comes the helping his father part. Player ends up defeating fear He himself grows tall. It's symbolizing his inner strength. And killing fear off is something that the neighbor originally failed at while he was alive. And now, after player is succeeding, the fear is gone and both of their souls are free. This scene is entirely symbolical. It happens in the mind of the player. Neighbor is standing at the door, which is leading towards freedom, thanks his son for the help and proceeds to go through the door. And after him goes the player. And now we are back in the present. Player's soul is free now. Now he can start a happier new chapter in his life full of hopes. He has forgiven to his father now that he understands his past actions, and now he proceeds to the cemetery to visit his grave. He technically broke the chain of generational trauma. He did not end up like his father did. This ending was in the beta 3 modkit as a scrapped ending. Back in the day, YouTubers showed it, so you can watch it. It cannot be replayed in the game itself, but it is in the modkit. So this is the family storyline in a very small little nutshell. The story was ahead of its time, just like the Faust one. And as soon as this family storyline was scrapped, movies like Encanto and Turning Red began to discuss its message, which is the generational trauma itself. Obviously, they did not see Hello Neighbor. I'm just saying that this topic is in fact mature enough and important enough for people to discuss during different media. And for Hello Neighbor, I just can't understand to this day how could they just throw it out after years of work? Because this very storyline was the story since Alpha 2. It had the same outcome since Alpha 2. Not even the story itself directly, but rather the way the story was told was the reason why so many people stick to this game. Because as I say in this other video, a lot of people had no idea about what I just told when the alphas and betas were releasing. They actually didn't know that the player and the neighbor might be a family and they might be related, but the way the stuff was presented to them in the builds was interesting enough for them to just enjoy the game itself and wait for the next build. I myself spent almost a year not knowing about this storyline. And when I started to actually research the older storylines of Hello Neighbor, I was just amazed by this very storyline. And I will tell you why. It's because of the message. It's that bad parenting and childhood traumas can completely mess up a person's life, his whole life. But at the same time, here this person shows strength despite he was hurt very badly as a child. He wants to know why his dad behaved the way he did. Player broke the chain of generational trauma by facing his past and defeating his fears, ending painful events in the family. Also, neighbor being saved is a necessary outcome because the game shows perfectly that he himself was a victim of bad parenting, just like later the player. So they were both victims. Neighbor saw bad examples only, and after his wife's death, he completely broke and couldn't control anything in his family. In this storyline, he's even more sad and vulnerable than in the final storyline of Hello Neighbor. The original ending with the neighbor's soul being saved was the best ending the game could ever have. It was a perfect conclusion. As for the neighbor himself, I'm not entirely sure how he died. I would say he took his own life, but that's also just my theory. He's obviously not there in the house in the present, only in players' memories. We finally got to the characters. First of all, I named these two the Golden Apple family. This will come back in a later video as a topic. As soon as I mention why, you will immediately understand why I named them like this. Player had a mom and a dad. The mother died when player was a child. You can see family pictures on the wall, but the mom's presence in the entire game is non-existent. You can also see the hospital bed in the Alpha 2 pantry, and neighbor is crying in Alpha 3. Also, as always, if you head to the kitchen, one of the three chairs is fallen by default when you start up the game. This, even in the final release of Hello Neighbor, symbolizes the loss of a family member. If I were to guess, the mother perhaps died in a car accident. This is only a theory of mine. The car is seen between the few things in the Alpha 3 ending. It's on the fence all the time, parked, even though we know for sure that neighbor loves his car. And there's also a light pole on the opposite side, which is bended as if something like a car knocked against it. And this was fixed in the final release of Hello Neighbor. So maybe, perhaps that was the case, but again, this is just a theory of mine. One thing is for sure, this mother figure isn't Diane yet. This is the original, very first wife of the neighbor, who basically we know nothing about, only that she is dead. And with the mother gone, only a child and his father stayed. Player, as I said earlier, is a very broken, depressed, and anxious person in his 30s. He completely fails at life so badly he doesn't have a job anymore and cannot pay his rent, so he gets evicted. It is also possible that he fled from the neighbor's house as soon as he turned 18, or maybe even earlier, ending up in a hellhole small apartment in the city, having basically nothing in his possession, only his car. Player has returning nightmares and traumatic flashbacks all the time. He is forced to return to the house where he grew up in. He has no other option, and his brain immediately gets trapped in the pit of horrible memories from childhood. But also, he has a very good soul. That's why I like him the most out of all player characters, because this good soul is actually shown in the story. He does care a lot, and instead of burying his memories further, he just wants to put an end to it finally and find the reason why did his dad treat him the way he did. Horribly. I want to say that there's no sign of actual abuse or anything. So if people walk up to you and start saying like this just because they openly hate the neighbor, just ignore it. The game is supposed to show how we have to overcome traumas and rise above them to live a happier life than in the past. It's about progressing, moving on, and not getting stuck in fears and trauma. So, despite all of the fear, we can say that player does love his dad, and now that he understands why the neighbor acted the way he did, he can forgive him and finally visit his grave. Neighbor is the husband of a woman who we know basically nothing about, and the father of a child. He's possibly an inventor in this storyline too, because he built the Sharkotron himself. There's many Slavic solutions and puzzle in the house that were 100% made by him. There's also that one photo the both of them kept, a photo taken about the two of them in front of the house. And you can see it in the player's apartment and in the pantry as well during the ending. After losing his wife, the neighbor completely broke, just like he breaks in the final game. Not only broke, he clearly had zero idea how to handle a child who is also rebelling and grieving due to losing his mother. So they probably fought a lot and they didn't get along at all. Neighbor is horrible at communication, and so is the player. And I can surely say they had no communication while the neighbor was still alive and player was young. One day the player just probably left the house and his father behind. So neighbor is dead in the present, is at the graveyard. What we see is the player's memories of him and the behavior that player imagines by reliving his memories. Neighbor is also like gameplay wise, he's guarding the basement door, so obviously he won't let the player progress. Sometimes he's quite aggressive, someone who wants to prevent the player from progressing to the subconscious itself and revealing probably very traumatic memories. But at the same time, he's incredibly sad, and the game shows it. And as we progress, we will also see that he's very helpless under the surface. As said before, the thing represents fear. It has always been fear. The thing here also plays the figure of a horrifying parent in the gramophone cutscene and during the final fight as well, but then it just merges into fear. So technically, its main goal is to show how fear works. And in the end, player defeats fear, both his own fears and the neighbors. This gramophone cutscene, which I keep mentioning, is a very weird cutscene, and the fact that you can progress and complete the game without ever viewing it, despite it's one of the most important elements in the game, is even weirder. So it's about you growing the golden apple tree and getting the golden apple, and you can insert the golden apple itself into an old gramophone, which you can find on the map, and it will play a cutscene which is from the neighbor's perspective. I will later mention it. I just wanted to give a quick sum up because I realized I forgot to add this early on. To this very day, there are lesser known storyline elements in the game. While the gramophone clearly tells the torture of the kid neighbor, which is supposedly caused by his father, unwillingly passing on horrible example on how to not raise your child, the fear minigames themselves have different purposes. They are supposed to show how the player slowly defeats part of his trauma and becomes a stronger person mentally. They all reward a new ability that he will have to use in the basement area later, which is one of the final trials. Let's not forget the fact that either the thing or the gramophone are in these minigames watching the player. So fear in some kind of form is always present, watching you even if you don't see it. Fear Darkness is the most important one out of all fear minigames. As the title says, yeah, but other than this, it possibly, perhaps, shows the fear of small spaces, hence it's the actual pantry itself we see at the beginning and at the end. Player is very tiny here, vulnerable and defenseless, making his way up. He probably was closed into this very pantry multiple times when he wasn't behaving well. Fear Darkness is full of symbolical items which were removed in the final game. That's how you can tell that they made sense in this storyline and not in the final one. This minigame gives the ability of double jump. Fear School is also obvious for people who were bullied in school as children. Welcome to the club. This minigame gives you the ability to push the bully away from yourself. Fear Supermarket was the trickiest one for me, because other than getting lost in a giant supermarket between a bunch of people who can do nothing but judge and hurt you and take your items, it gives you the ability to hide from their eyes. Fear Factory, however, despite later being completely scrapped due to being unfinished, is my favorite. Anything factory related is my favorite. It's possibly about the push of society, negative push mostly, you needing to fit into society while maybe you don't want to. Player has to throw an object to distract the mannequins, who by the way always symbolize people in this case. Only by distracting them can he progress. So yeah, it's probably something with society pushing weights on you. It originally gave the super throw ability, which was included in the final version of the game by default. So this one was entirely cut out from the game. Fear Hospital is a lesser known minigame since it was only shown in the mod kit and not in the game itself. It was probably showing the mother's death. It's unfinished like the Factory 1, and it just legit loop with a camera going on it like it was a roller coaster. And these fear minigames in the final game were changed in details. Not only changed, they basically don't have the same symbolical meaning anymore. Like, I would say that they made the most sense in this very storyline because they were created for this storyline. We finally got to the basement itself. To cut it short, there's no basement. I mean, technically, there is a basement, but in reality, in the present, there isn't. In the beginning, player opens a pantry. A pantry which brings him so many painful memories, he just gets sunk in it. Already in Alpha 3, when opening the basement, the player got teleported to a room with a crying neighbor. It's also a memory. The basement always supposed to show memories. Player sees his dad crying. It's a childhood memory. There's a shadow of the kid listening to his father. It was either fear itself or the child himself. Both would make sense in the context, so that's why it's a bit misleading. But it's a memory. It's not a basement, it's a memory. As said before, the basement is the subconscious itself of the neighbor and the player, the storage of painful memories. Upon entering, it takes a form, and it takes the form of a giant basement that the player has to progress through. Both neighbor and the player relive their darkest memories from the past, their most hidden fears. Neighbor takes one last attempt to make the player turn back from progressing, but the player is luckily very stubborn, and after the basement, which is supposed to show the painful memories player already tried to struggle himself through, he ends up in his very own child room. The child room which is destroyed by the giant neighbor, without a single knock this time. Neighbor, for some reason, has a habit of aggressively knocking on doors in this storyline, and it is obviously shown that it's him knocking on the door. But this giant neighbor isn't even angry at his son. He is in pain. After player progresses to the earlier mentioned back house, the burden the man is carrying, he finds the thing, Fear, attempting to hurt his dad. And after Fear is defeated, player is leaving the same pantry in the present with relief in his heart. So technically in the real world, where adult player is present and things are actually happening in his life, there's no basement. Only a pantry he was maybe close to and which triggered horrible memories to him. Player non-stop tries to save his kid self from being close to this place. But only then does he realize that he must include the neighbor's memories as well to save himself too. This video is longer than expected, so I will only mention the most important symbolical things. So the basement from earlier isn't technically a basement, but the manifestation of the most painful memories collected together. Golden apple, which keeps changing its symbolical purpose non-stop, and I mean non-stop during each storyline, here has a different meaning from the rest. It's the symbol of the special child. In my opinion, it was never confirmed, but in my opinion, it is that. The child who breaks the chain of generational trauma. Now, there's multiple golden apples present in the game, but the main one, the only one the player can get and use, is giving an only chance to put into the gramophone and view the neighbor's memories, which in fact is the key to understand the storyline. So the golden apple here in the family storyline symbolizes a special apple which is different from the other apples. The gramophone probably symbolizes the actual traumatic item of the neighbor. He accidentally breaks it and he gets punished very badly for it. It's maybe his father's property or a family treasure they had to keep the children away from. The fact that he's scared of his father more than anything else, and the gramophone is in the picture always. Now, in the player's case, this traumatic item is the pantry or the basement door, and there's eyes everywhere. It's the other symbol which is quite important. Like the eyes are literally everywhere, even on the wallpaper itself. It is obviously symbolizing being watched all the time, judged, hurt. It's actually ruining people and making people paranoid on the go. It mainly shows with the neighbor in the basement, where in the end you find him surrounded by cameras. Okay, enough for now. The entire house itself and everything in it technically is a symbol, so it's for a separate video for later. I know that this was a very heavily informative video. I tried to simplify it as much as possible, but it's quite hard to give you a conclusion on this storyline. And as I said, it was only the very surface of what's actually happening in this storyline. What I want to say is, it took me over a half year of actively research everything, going to the game back and forth, reading every possible public source I could, and 2 days after I wrote the final sketch of the family storyline document in 2020, I ran into this very video.
So now we're going back to a suburb where we grew up. Because, now we need to get to the house where we grew up. And it's still there.
Oh, man,
it's all
great neighborhood.
It technically confirms the base plot, which I figured out. So it's kind of a clarification for sure. If only I saw it earlier, I would have saved myself some time. But still, there's much more which is worth discussing. For example, it's also worth mentioning that the error world, the ARG, which was running throughout the entire Hello Neighbor development and in the final game, is already present next to the family storyline. But say it with me, it will be discussed in a separate video. It's not strictly related to the main plot of the family storyline or any other storyline. Please watch my other videos too, mainly this one. It was painfully much work. And that's it for now. See you guys later.